All right, so you've just seen we went 872, 873 back to back at 160, 159 and a half sort of mile an hour. Pretty consistent, pretty bracket racer-esque there. Still not fast in the front part of the track. I mean, we put on 33 mile an hour in the back end of the track, which shows the back end of the track's really going pretty well. But it's that front part of the track, you know, that 127 mile an hour to half track. Ideally, I'd love to see that at getting up to like 135 or something like that. You know, if we can go to 135 to half track and still put on, you know, 35 mile an hour, it'll go a long way to running potentially somewhere at some point in time into the sevens, which would be incredible. Let's have a bit of a look and debrief on some of the data here on everything. It's just essentially a comparison graph of shock travel through, you know, from the starting point to what's about here, which is about the consistent 60 foot for these three passes. All of them did between 145 and 146 or 147 or something 60 foot. So very comparable in terms of the time. So the aggressive bar angle, we've got here 4.7. That's not 4.7 inches of shock travel. That's at the resting height of that shock was at 0.7. So that's 4 inches of shock travel. Down here was the very sedate bar angle, and you can see 1.9 inches of travel there. Resting height of that was actually half an inch. So that's 1.5 inches of shock travel. So just from moving the 4-link bars around, there's a difference in shock travel of, you know, a lot. And that separation is what plants the tire and gives us the traction or whatever. So yesterday we had 2.6. The resting height was about 0.2. So at this same point, which is about 0.7 seconds, we had about almost 2.5 inches of shock travel, sort of in between basically where, you know, where the other ones, the other bars were. But what you can see here is that this topped out the shock here almost at 0.7, which is probably where we want to get some really full extension there by 0.7. And this one keeps on extending out, and it didn't actually fully extend out until about 2.5 seconds into the run. That's got less to do with bar angle and all the shocks and more to do with something else, which we'll run over very shortly. So what I'll show you here too is that at that 0.7 seconds, you can see wheel speed. This is just calculated wheel speed. You can see the yesterday we're about 21 mile an hour. On the 9.0 pass, we're 25 mile an hour. So we were actually quicker to this point of the track than we were yesterday when we ran 870. But if you fast forward then out to where the 60 foot is, which was about here, 1.5 seconds, you can see we're now 5 mile an hour quicker. So what this shows you here is that we were very, very lazy in the 60 foot yesterday. We weren't any quicker than that 9.0 pass until that 1.1 seconds into the run. That's the shock travel. So what I'm going to do here is change nothing, and I'll go over why I'm going to change nothing shortly. What you can see here, all these lines here, is this is my wastegate target. So this is basically, this is not actual boost. This is what the boost I want to put on top of the dome. So you can see here I was leaving there, and by 0.3 seconds, whatever was on the 2-step, now I want to ramp in boost. So you can see my boost here, I've ramped up to 20, you know, basically on the dome, I want 26 PSI. I think I've got 13 pound springs in it. I have to actually check, to be honest. I think I've got 13 pound springs in it. So what I'm essentially commanding here is, depending on back pressure, is around about 38 or so PSI. But what you can see here, this is manifold pressure, so this is actual pressure. What you can see here is that I'm launching at 17.5, which is something I'll get back to as well. You can see the RPM, wasn't quite where it should have been. So what you'll see here is, yep, we've got a pretty sedate boost ramp into 0.3 seconds, and then by 0.8 seconds, I want to go from essentially what is 18 PSI to 38 PSI really quickly. But what you can see here is that even though I'm commanding 36 PSI here, we don't hit the target of that boost until about right at the 60 foot mark. So this is why people run, I guess they run compressed air or CO2, because look how lazy it was sort of on the dome before it got to where it needed to get to. So, you know, the lag in to go from here, this is how quickly I wanted it to happen, and this is how quickly it did happen. And what that means is, without the boost, you're not going anywhere. If this actually come in this quick and it hit here, this manifold pressure target here of 36 PSI, you can see it lines up exactly where, you know, the peak, the dome pressure is. If that was here, you know, you're looking at, what's that, 0.8 seconds and, you know, almost 1.3. So you're looking at almost half a second of your peak horsepower being in quicker, which means you will go significantly faster. Got to look into that. We're probably going to run the compressed air stuff now. Wasn't running it because that MAC valve that I've mentioned before in other videos still is leaking. So I'm either going to try and take it apart again or just buy a new one. I'm not sure why it's leaking. The second issue here at the start line is this one. So one of the issues we've been having recently in the last few, or every single meet we've been at basically, is as soon as we roll out from the start line, it slightly sort of chatters the tires or starts to try and turn the tires, and it grips and then it goes. So, and that happens almost instantaneously on the hit. You can hear in other videos, you hear it just go, and you see it in the drive shaft, the spike, then it comes back down and then it goes. Now, it's building some wheel speed, but it's not building it the way we want because it's not gripping. You know, you want instantaneous grip, build some non-wheel turning wheel speed, and then boof, and then go. In the map where we're on boost, you'll see almost here ignition timing is just click the thing. You can see it's just a flat line basically of always 15 degrees. On the two-step, I normally have a bit more ignition timing in that, only a couple of degrees more just to get it to build boost even quicker, even with the nitrous there. It's not extraordinary amount of load, and we're on methanol. I ain't going to hurt anything by putting an extra couple of degrees in on the two-step. So what I did is I took out those 2 degrees to bring it to 15 in a lot of that two-step map to try and ensure that it would, maybe to see if it would knock some torque out of it. So, you know, we control that initial wheel chirp off the line. What I found was 2 things. I don't know if that's the cause, but more than likely the RPM factor is the cause here, but I didn't have any wheel spin at all at the track yesterday. So, I mean, changing track conditions and stuff like that makes it difficult as well. So this is where you start getting a bit, not confused, but a bit lost. You say, was it just incredible track prep yesterday, the reason we weren't chirping the tyre, and the other days it wasn't as great? Was it something to do with chassis setup? Was it to do with power? You can see the RPM here, 6411. And you can see it's sort of a flat line, it's not climbing anymore. And this was on both passes. So I left the line at 6,400 RPM instead of 6,700 RPM. Even 100 RPM can make a massive difference on your launch, on how the car launches in terms of turning the tire or whatever. Even 50 RPM can make a difference. So this is now where I wouldn't have even thought of running maybe as low as 6,400 RPM, but 6,400 RPM worked really well. But my problem is I couldn't build any more than 6,400 RPM. And I'm not sure if it's because the torque there, taking those extra 2 degrees of timing out, if it made a difference with engine torque or what it might have been. So I'm going to put a bit of that timing back in, maybe 1 degree, and see if I can get it up. And I think instead of having a 6750 RPM launch target, next time out I'm going to have a 6550 RPM launch target. And maybe as well, target a bit more boost, because as you can see by this slow, long ramp up, the quicker we can build boost, the more power we're making. So, you know, if it takes it at 6,500 RPM and it doesn't turn the tire, and instead of 17.5 pound of boost, I could have 20 pound of boost, have the compressed air where it goes from the wastegate target here and it brings it up there quickly. If we can have this, you know, 36, 37 pound of boost here, and the track takes it, that is where we get our 60-foot time. You look at the 60-foot time, 146, 145. It doesn't look extraordinarily fast. Now, that's true, it's not, but it's not because of through the car not working or whatever. It's through design, through the tuner. It's left the line with less RPM probably than it should. It's then got a pretty lazy boost curve because the dome pressure's playing catch up. And, you know, once the dome pressure gets there, it's great. But what we want to see is, we want to see this over here. The track that Lance has inherited was the original track. He's done as much work as he can in building the amenities up so people have a great experience when they come to the track. And we know as racers, you know, actual racers know that the track will come, and we're fine with that. So what you'll see here in the top end of the track is a lot of drive shaft RPM spikes, and we lost a bit of manifold pressure there, and that's just because there's bumps in the track up at this period. So he's starting to go pretty fast here, and you're hitting bumps, and it starts oscillating, and each one of these bumps, again, you have a bump in drive shaft RPM and you have a bump in engine RPM, you know that you're turning the tire a fair bit. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 significant ones, and then another one just before the finish line. So we're going pretty fast here. The best thing about radials is that it has a stiff sidewall. This car just rides the bumps fine. I can hear it in the car going, but the car feels stable and it goes straight and it's fine. I actually pulled the parachute on this pass, not because I want to or actually need to at Heathcote, mainly because the IHRA steward starter on the start line was absolutely jumping up and down, having kittens to the other guys that were filming at the start line for me the pass before when I went 160, screaming that I need to pull the chute. So I think there's a rule that says that, if you go over 140, 150 mile an hour, you have to pull the chute. But the runoff at Heathcote is so long, and I've got an incredible braking system on this car that I just don't need to. And when I'm by myself, it is such an inconvenience to pack the chute. It really is. Did it make a difference in the brake? I mean, yeah, sure, you can feel it grab, and then it's, you're a little easier on the pedal, but I don't need to be easier on the pedal. Is what it is. If I've got to pull it, I'll pull it. But it's, it just adds. Packing the chute would add the longest time to turning the car around, if anything. This played havoc with the tune-up a little bit too, because it was unloading the car and raising the RPM. It started to drop manifold pressure a bit, so it was fluctuating all over the engine map in terms of cells, and it was right on the edge of like peak torque where there's a lot of fuel, and then not so the other areas where where there's less fuel. So we're sort of going a bit like lean rich, which was sort of playing a bit of havoc with the EGTs. You can see here, they were sort of on point here, and then they sort of went up or whatever, and then they come back down again where it was a bit overly, a little bit rich sort of in the top end. So from the start of the day, the first pass, we took out about 5% of fuel. And then after the second pass, I took out about 2% of fuel out of the front rotor, and I took out about 4% fuel out of the rear rotor. And it went from absolute zero to hero with just, that extra 3% of fuel basically overall. An overall trim of 3% of fuel went from misfiring its head off and being completely horrendous to being like killer and clean. Auto shift worked great. I've got the lag points down right now, but you'll see here I hit the limiter because I programmed like about another 250 RPM on the second to third shift. I probably need to pull it back about another 50 RPM or 100 RPM. Or raise the limiter. So I've done both. I've raised the limiter to like 1050 now, or 10,500 RPM, and I've pulled the 2-3 shift back to 9550 RPM, but by the time it shifts and then the auto actually shifts, that's probably going to happen at 9900 RPM. You can see here closed loop fuel systems are 3.0 in that top end at 40 pounder boost. There's still definitely heaps left in here to go through it all. I expected it to go faster because I took a little bit of fuel out in the top end, so I expected this to actually go faster on this fourth pass, not to be exactly the same. So it left on about 50 or so, or maybe even a bit more than 50 RPM less than the previous run, which meant that it was a little bit lazier on the boost ramping in. And also I think we turned the tire even harder in the top end because we're probably making a little bit more power, which meant the boost actually dropped off a fair bit. So we ended up all through this mid part here, we're actually running almost 2 pounder boost less than the pass before, or 1.5 pounder, 2 pounder less all the way through this part from here to here than the previous pass, which is horsepower. I think that's just because we turned the tire even harder than we did the pass before. Overall, pretty happy with the day. It's funny, now I'm starting to get so much more used of driving the car and comfortable in that I guess almost from half track now, I'm just looking at the dash. The minute I start looking at the dash, both passes was basically 133, 134 mile an hour on both the passes. And the speed at which it goes from like 134 to 157, it just seems to happen so fast. And it's basically, you know, it's probably like 1.5 seconds that it happens in. So it is fast. It's happening pretty quickly there. I had enough time in that last pass to look at the dash and have a look around the car, and yep, that's where my shift, that's where my parachute lever is, and pull it, and yeah, away we go. So I think I pulled the chute right on when I crossed the line, so I need to pull the chute a bit further before that, because it's got to have time to release and then blossom and that. So I didn't want to pull it, and the reason, obviously, you don't want to pull it too early, and then, you know, just say you're on the cusp of running an 850 or whatever, you pull the chute, it just jolts you a bit and your mile an hour drops down a bit. There's no reason to pull the chute massively early at Heathcote. So it's not like sort of if you had really bad brakes and you're racing at somewhere like Sydney, if you were really late on the chute, you might end up in the gravel. So yeah, overall pretty good. Have the little rivalry going on with the guys in the red Gemini. They ran 8. They ran on their last pass, they ran like an 873, but I think they ran 868, 158 or 159. So they went quicker ET-wise. They haven't gone 160 in their car yet, so I'm still holding the mile an hour crown there. But the best part about it is, obviously, you can only sort of race, fast cars can only race in the left lane at Heathcote at the moment, because the sort of the ski ramp that's in the right lane at about 100-foot mark. So once the track gets resurfaced, we'll be able to line up and yeah, do some head-to-head grudge racing on together. So looking forward to that. That should be good. But yeah, their car's going really great. They're probably getting a handle on it turning the tyre as well now. They've got beadlocks now on the car, so now, you know, everything they're putting through, it's working, and you can audibly hear that thing turning the tyre sounds like it's turning it hard in first gear. You have to turn the tyre a bit with a slick, it's different than a radial, but yeah, they're sort of hovering around the 140 60 foot as well. So both looking forward to the new track and new surface, and yeah, building on it. But I think overall data-wise, you can see here there's probably less to look at than there was in previous runs, because things are going right now. You know, we've got a handle on stuff, and things are going right. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for everyone coming out. It was interesting. Almost for sort of the first time yesterday, Heathcote was one of the first times where I probably had close to a dozen people come up and say, I've you know, followed the car on full boost, I watch all your videos, really love the car, love the stuff you're doing, and that was pretty cool. So you know, previous days at Heathcote haven't really spoken to a lot of people. It was a lot busier yesterday as well, but yeah, it's pretty cool that that other people come up and say they watch the stuff and like it. So thanks everyone that watches. Really appreciate the comments. So yeah, I think what I am going to do now, is that the track's obviously going to resurface. There's going to be a couple of meets. It's going to be pretty green at first. We're going to have that top fuel meet on the 21st of May. This car's done, and the engine specifically has done a lot of work. It's done dyno stuff and racing like the 626. It's done close to 20 dyno pulls. It's had almost, I think it's done 20 or so passes. The entire car's done 20 passes. So it's at the point now where I almost want to take the whole thing apart. I want to inspect everything. I want to inspect the diff, the axles. I might actually even pull down the engine. It's probably actually done like 40 dyno pulls, and that because it's done the dyno pulls in the 626 as well. So, you know, for a race engine where you're putting like close to like 40 pound of boost into it, and you've done 40 dyno pulls, which are essentially like a pass. If you add that to the 25 whatever passes we've done, if it's done 65 passes, it's probably pretty good maintenance to pull it down and just to see where everything's at. So I think we'll completely disassemble this thing now, essentially, and have a look over at everything and make sure everything's okay. And then, yeah, put it all back together. In two minds on if I do pull down the engine, because I'm not sure if I will. If I do pull down the engine, do I reassemble it with cast parts, or do I just put billet front and rear plate in it now, just because it's probably something I want to do in the future anyway. So if I'm going to pull it apart now, why not, I guess, give me that extra safety blanket of doing it now, and you know, next time we're out the track, go, I'm going to put 45 pounder boost plus in it and not care, because we have the turbo to do that and then some. You know, you have a look in the top end where it was running. Where are we? You know, we've got here 39 pounder boost in map pressure and back pressure 37 psi. So that's not even 1-to-1 in terms of back pressure. And that means that we have got a long way to go of how much air we can keep on shoving in this engine, which is fantastic. 8.7, great. You know, we get that 145/60 foot down to 125. That 8.7 with the exact same tune-up, with no difference in anything in the tune-up at all, that 8.7 becomes an 8.3. So, you know, 8.3 on, you know, 30, I think it was mainly 30, you know, this is what the boost is mostly, 38 pounder boost to run 830. Pretty happy with that, pretty happy with that. More than happy to put whatever boost in it needs to run a 7. I think that's the really long-term goal for this car. It always has been. I've ticked off some goals this weekend of running the 8, first 8, and running 160 mile an hour. A couple of really extraordinary feats that I'm really happy with. But again, you know, the car just feels slow now. I'm already used to it running 870. I think it's, you know, the 145/60 foot feels so lazy. If we can get, I want to do 125/60 foot because I want to feel that in the car. I think that'll feel really, really awesome to feel those 2.5 G or whatever on launch. As for where it's at now, you know, we're racers. You know, you get to the point where you run fast and you just always want to run faster. So. Anyway, I think that's enough for today. So thanks for watching. Thanks for all those people that come out to the track and saw us racing that. And yeah, if you've ever filming any of the car or whatever, please, I'd love to see as much footage as possible of the car and that. It's you know, it's hard on racing the car, so I can't look at I can't get it and film for myself. So if anyone's got footage or anyone's doing any slow-mo especially or something, I'd really love to see. That first 60 foot is where you want to see footage of the car. But if anyone's ever got footage there at the track and they're filming in that, I'd love to be able to feature it here. So if you're willing to share it, yeah, feel free to send it to me. So thanks to the guys that do film, like Corey, Narelle, and Pete. So thanks for that. And I think with that, we're done. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.